I will tell you something about the High Court of Valdenmere before I tell you about her. The court does not forgive. It was built in the reign of my grandfather's grandfather, cold black stone, high vaulted ceiling, no windows but the 4 iron-framed slits near the roof that let in 4 thin columns of morning light and nothing else. When a man or woman stands at the accused's plinth in the center of that hall, the light finds them from above like a finger pointing down. There is nowhere to hide in it, and no one has ever stood there and felt anything but judgment. I had presided over 41 trials in that court. I had never once felt my wolf stir at the plinth. He stirred the morning she walked in. I did not understand it. She was brought under guard at the 7th bell, 2 soldiers, no chains, because the charge was not yet a conviction, and I do not chain the accused before the verdict. She was small. She wore a gray traveling cloak that had been rained on more than once, and a plain dress the color of river clay underneath. No pack mark on her wrist, no house crest at her collar. She was what the court record called her, a packless village healer from the eastern border road, no name anyone had thought to write down before the arrest, entered in the ledger simply as the woman from Teldrath. Lord Kevein's household had written the charge. Lord Kevein, border lord of the Southern Holding, a man whose name I had signed 7 land treaties with, a man whose word had carried weight in this hall for 11 years, lay dead of slow silver-root poisoning. His steward had found her at the estate 3 days before the death. She had been engaged to treat a fever in Lord Kevein's stable yard. The steward swore she had been alone in the still room. The still room was where the silver-root was kept. The evidence, my counsel told me that morning, was clean. The verdict would take an hour. My wolf told me something different from the moment she walked in. He did not growl. He did not surge. He simply went still. Not the stillness of sleep. The stillness of a man who has been looking for something his whole life and has just seen it across a crowded yard and cannot yet speak. I sat in the high seat and watched her walk to the plinth, and I felt that stillness move through me like a current under ice, slow and immense, and I did not yet know what to do with it. She stood at the plinth and looked at the court. She did not look at the floor. She did not look at her hands. She looked at the 4 thin columns of light coming through the iron slits above, and there was something in her face, not defiance, not fear, but a kind of steady patience. The way a woman looks who has been waiting a long time for a thing and has decided to wait without flinching. My Lord Justice read the charge. She listened. When he finished, she said clearly, "I did not touch the silver-root." 7 words. My wolf moved again, not a surge, a confirmation. I had heard those 7 words in 100 variations from 100 accused in that hall, and I had learned to hear the hollow at the center of them when they were not true. There was no hollow in hers. I raised my hand before my Lord Justice could proceed to evidence. "Where," I said, "is the still-room log?" The steward had brought it. Every estate of Lord Kevein's rank was required by Crown law to keep a log of every controlled substance in the still-room, who entered, for what purpose, and when. My Lord Justice laid it before me. I opened it. The last entry before the death read, Lord Kevein's personal seal, the silver-root drawn out under his own hand, 4 days before the death, 1 day before she had arrived at the estate at all. I looked up at the steward. He was a thin man with a careful face, and he had been watching me read, and now his careful face went very still in a different way. The way a man's face goes still when he understands he has made a mistake. "You told this court," I said, "that she was alone in the still room." "She was, my Lord King." The silver-root was drawn from the still room the day before her arrival, under Lord Kevein's own seal. I held the log up so my counsel could see it. What was she alone with? The great hall was absolutely quiet. The 4 thin columns of light came through the iron slits. She was still standing at the plinth, and I could not help but see, the moment the tension went out of her shoulders. Not relief, not triumph. Just the easing of a woman who has been holding herself together under an enormous weight and has felt, for the first time, the weight begin to shift. My counsel asked for an adjournment. I granted 3 days. In 3 days, I did what I have always done in this court when the verdict felt wrong and the evidence felt arranged. I sent my own men, not the estate's guard, my men. They came back in 2 days with a name I had not expected and a document I liked even less. Lord Kevin had altered his will 6 weeks before his death. The new will transferred the eastern holdings, all of them, 11,000 acres of border land, away from his steward of 12 years, and toward a minor house that had recently offered a significant sum for the grazing rights. The steward stood to lose everything. The silver root had been drawn under Lord Kevin's seal, yes, but my men found the key to the Lord's private cabinet in the steward's quarters, a key the steward claimed he had never possessed. I reconvened the court on the morning of the 3rd day. She was brought back to the plinth. She wore the same gray cloak, the same river clay dress. She had been housed in the guest quarters by my standing order. No accused awaiting trial in a crown matter is held in a cell, and someone on my household staff had quietly found her a meal and a dry cloak to sleep under, and I found I was glad of it. The steward was brought in as well, under guard this time. I read the findings myself. The court was full, my counsel, the border lords, the garrison officers who had come in for the weekly reports and had not yet left. It was not a small audience. When I finished reading, the hall was so quiet I could hear the rain that had started against the iron slits above. The charge against the woman from Teldrath, I said, is dismissed. The evidence was arranged. The court acknowledges it. My Lord Justice wrote it in the record. The steward was taken out. I should have ended the session there. My wolf had other thoughts. I was still looking at her. She was still standing at the plinth. She had not moved, had not yet seemed to understand she was permitted to move, and the light from the iron slits came down across her face, and my wolf pressed forward in a way he had not done in 32 years of my life. Not a demand, a recognition. The same current under ice I had felt 3 days ago, except that now it was not under anything. It moved through me openly. And my wrist was warm in a way it had never been, and I looked down in the bond mark, the silver line I had carried since birth, the mark every Alpha King carries and waits his whole life to have answer, was not silver anymore. It was gold, full, bright, unhesitating gold. I stood up from the high seat. That is not a small thing. A sitting king does not stand in open court for a verdict. The hall noticed. I heard the change in the room the way you hear wind pick up before a storm, a collective drawing of breath, the rustle of 30 people going still at once. I came down from the high seat. I walked the length of the hall to the plinth. She watched me come. She did not step back. She did not look at the floor. Those same steady eyes, the eyes that had found the 4 columns of light on the morning she walked in, accused of a death she had not caused, and had waited without flinching. I stopped in front of her. "You came to that estate," I said, "to treat a fever in the stable yard." "A young groom," she said. "He had been sick 4 days. No one had sent for a healer." "And you treated him." "He recovered." A pause, then quietly, "I checked on him twice before the arrest." I looked at her face and I thought. She came to that estate, treated a boy that no one else had bothered to treat, and nearly lost her life for it. And the thing she tells me first is that he recovered. I held out my wrist. She looked at it, at the gold there, still bright, still unhesitating. She looked up at me. Something moved in her eyes that was not quite surprise and not quite certainty, but something between the two, something that looked like a woman recognizing a thing she had not let herself expect. She took my wrist in her hands. The bond blazed. Not warmth, not the gradual copper into amber I might have imagined. It blazed, immediate and complete, the way a lantern blazes when you unshutter it in a dark room, sudden light, no hesitation, total. My wolf went from that deep, still current to full, open, certain peace. I felt it settle in my chest like a key turning. Around us, the hall was doing things I registered only at the edge of my attention. Lord Geethon, my senior border lord, had put both hands on the table in front of him and leaned forward. My Lord Justice had stopped writing. The garrison officers at the back had gone very straight. Somewhere in the hall, someone's chair moved as they rose. I was not paying attention to any of it. "I am going to name you," I said, "before this court, before all of them." I wanted her to choose it. I had read the wrong verdict nearly entered against this woman 3 days ago in my own hall, and she would choose every step from here. "If you are willing." She was still holding my wrist. She looked at the gold mark and at me, and the patience in her face shifted, not gone, but warmer, the way morning light shifts when the cloud that has been crossing it finally passes. "I came to Valdenmere," she said, "to treat a sick boy, a breath. I suppose I can stay for something more." I turned to the court. "She has no pack," I said, "and no house, and no mark that any lord in this room would have recognized this morning." I let that sit for a moment in the quiet. "She is mine. She is Luna of the high seat of Valdenmere. Any man who looks at her and sees the woman from Teldrath will correct himself." Lord Geethon was the first to bow. The border lords followed, not slowly, not reluctantly, but with the gravity of men who have just watched something they will describe for the rest of their lives. The garrison officers at the back bowed without being asked. My Lord Justice bowed over the open record. She was still standing at the plinth, but she was not the accused anymore. She was the one the court was facing. I offered her my arm. She took it, not with hesitation, not with ceremony, with the same plain steadiness that had carried her through 3 days of a charge she had not earned. We walked the length of the hall together, back past the high seat, out through the stone arch, into the corridor where the rain was still coming down against the narrow windows and the light was gray-green and clean. At the end of the corridor, she stopped and looked out at the rain. "That boy in the stable yard," she said. "Is there a healer assigned to the garrison here?" I looked at her. My wolf was so still and so content he might have been asleep, except that I knew he was not. He was simply, finally, at rest. The way a man is at rest when he has been looking for something across 32 years of courts and treaties and verdicts, and has at last found it standing beside him in a gray cloak, asking about the sick. "Not a good one," I said. She nodded, as though this confirmed something she had already suspected. "Then," she said, "I have work to do." I had named her before 30 lords and officers, and she was already thinking about the garrison sick. I stood in the corridor and listened to the rain and thought about the still-room log, the key found in a steward's quarters, and the 41 trials I had presided over without my wolf ever stirring at the plinth. About a groom sick 4 days before anyone sent for a healer, and a woman in a gray cloak who had come because no one else had bothered, and how close the court had come to a verdict I would never have been able to correct. My wolf had known. From the moment she walked in, before I had read a word of the log, my wolf had known. "The garrison healer," I said, "is more comfortable with horses than with men." She turned from the rain. There was something almost like amusement at the corner of her mouth, the first warmth I had seen break through that steadiness. "I have treated a few horses," she said. "I suspected you had." She looked at me for a moment with that same honest, unhurried attention, the way she had looked at the light in the court and at the bond mark on my wrist. "All right," she said. It was not a vow. It was not a ceremony. It was the plainest word in the language, said the way she did everything, steadily, without performance, meaning exactly what it was. The bond on my wrist was still gold. My wolf was still at rest. The rain was still coming down. The court had 4 thin columns of light and no windows, and it had never felt like anything but judgment. She had walked into it accused, and it had given me the one thing 41 verdicts never had. I did not think I would forget that.